It is 65 BC, and at the river Abas beneath the purple and white curtain of the great Caucasus Mountains, Euphrates, king of Albania, has obscured the greater part of his army amidst the thick forest of the riverlands, waiting for the host of Rome. When the forces of Pompey Magnus appear, they are a mere cavalry company, and Euphrates immediately gives the order to spring the assault, striking the invader from the field. His men in thousands duly sprint from their hiding places, streaming down onto Pompey's cavalry from both sides. The Roman horsemen turn about, inflating the Albanians' appetite for blood, compelling them to run and ride until their lungs are bursting and hearts pound to a crescendo. But as they chase the fleeing enemy, the Albanians themselves run into a ghastly trap. Pompey has concealed his legions, using the retreating cavalry as a screen to obscure their position. The Roman horsemen pass through the lines of hidden infantry, and the pursuing Albanian troops literally run into the concealed legions, who kneel in the tall grass. The fresh Romans rise, lock shields, and stab the drained Albanians, eviscerating Euphrates' front line within minutes. The greater part of his army is gradually enveloped, and it is too late to pull them back. Pompey has outmaneuvered and encircled them in their tens of thousands. Methodically and ruthlessly, the Romans put them to the sword, until all that remains is a charred field of bodies. Assassin's Creed in Raid. Yes, we now get 5 iconic assassins from the Assassin's Creed franchise. Even my long-lost medieval ancestors would crawl out of the Animus just to play Raid with the Assassin's Creed characters. The design of each champion is stunningly faithful to the original Assassin's Creed, and you can get Ezio for free by logging into the game for 7 days, and keep coming on for another 7 days to quickly gear up Ezio Assassin's Creed. But this is a limited time event, so make sure not to miss out and download the game today through the link below. You can also obtain other assassins through summon boosts, tournaments, and dedicated events. Speaking of events, you get to fight the event dungeon antagonist, Pontiff Augustine, for time-limited chronophage gear, as well as gear from other valuable sets. Jump into some Assassin's Creed action in Raid, click my link in the description, or scan my QR code to get exclusive bonuses. Instantly unlock legendary support champion Nama the Returned. Reach level 15 to get an amazing epic from the Undead Hordes, Mausoleum Mage. Log in for 7 days to claim a free legendary Ezio from Assassin's Creed. And new players can pick 1 out of 6 promo codes for a free legendary champion of their choice. Tree Hugger, Get Alice, Kitty Cat, Monkey King, Go Fast Ut King. Pick one of the codes quickly, as these are available only 48 hours after you download the game via my link or QR code, and you can't get them anywhere else. Back in Rome, news of Pompey's great victory is greeted with celebrations and acclamations of the Republic's invincibility. The disparity of casualties makes it appear that any clash between the legions and Oriental armies can end in nothing but an overwhelming Roman triumph. In extirpating the East, Pompey has made it look easy. Few but the most discerning and informed citizens take note of the fact that the victory came about due to Pompey's obsessive and prodigious talent for logistics, his flair for inspiring and assuring his men, his zeal for interminable training and maneuvering. All aspects of generalship fused and accumulated until they produce armies capable of sustaining a campaign and fighting battles in the most inhospitable terrain on Earth. Instead, Rome holds Pompey to be a divine talisman of deserved fortune and Roman superiority is imagined to be an inherent characteristic of its people. One of the most prominent observers is Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome and the bankroller of aspiring politicians like one Gaius Julius Caesar. Crassus has been among the foremost powers in Rome for decades. His unyielding determination and unforgiving character was scored into existence on seeing his father's head mounted on a spear during the civil wars of Sulla and Marius, and his fortunes became so low in the aftermath that he was forced to hide out for months in a Spanish cave. On Pompey's return to Rome after his Eastern wars, he, Crassus, and Caesar form an alliance that comes to dominate the Roman Republic, giving their triumvirate the power, in effect, to take offices and commands as they wish, or at least without effective opposition. Caesar's campaigns in Gaul make him a military hero, at least on a par with Pompey, but Crassus's last military achievements were more than a decade previous, and against the lowly slave uprising of Spartacus. Going farther than Pompey, a campaign to claim the same ground as Alexander the Great would keep Crassus relevant and equal to his partners in the triumvirate. The dignitas of his son Publius will also benefit from such a venture, guaranteeing him a consulship and cementing the family legacy. At Lucca in 56 BC, the triumvirs agree that Caesar will continue with his war in Gaul, and Pompey and Crassus will jointly hold the consulship for the coming year. After that, Crassus will take the governorship of Syria and Pompey Hispania. Crassus's overt casus belli for a campaign in the east is the recent civil war in the Parthian Empire, which arose between the current Shah Orodes II and his father and brother. The death of Rome's preferred claimant gives Crassus the shaky pretext he needs to announce an invasion of Parthia. There is no one to oppose the declaration, and Caesar transfers Publius and 1,000 Gallic horsemen to catch up with his father's army. Crassus departs Rome on the Ides of November 55 BC. A tribune, Caius Ateius Capito, attempts to arrest Crassus on his departure for initiating an illegal war without the consent of the Senate or people. When this fails, Capito publicly and ostentatiously curses the proconsul and the expedition. Strange and ominous portents continue throughout Crassus's journey and up to his arrival in the east. By spring or very early summer 54 BC, he is at Antioch. With variously sized detachments from perhaps 7 legions and blithely ignoring Parthian borders, he crosses the Euphrates soon after his arrival and engages the forces of the Parthian satrap Salaces around Ichnae, which lies on the Balicha River. 2 of Crassus's legions have been inherited from Pompey's previous eastern command, and they are likely lacking in discipline due to their long posting in the east, and are also subject to desertions, illness, and casualties from garrison duty. Crassus's army additionally contains the Gallic auxiliary cavalry, Cretan archers, and perhaps even skirmishers from Numidia and the Balearic Islands. The operation against the local garrisons is a complete success, and Crassus establishes a loose bridgehead of sorts along the far side of the river, leveling the city of Zenodocian when it dares to resist his authority, and executes the small band of Roman soldiers stationed there. The inhabitants are taken as slaves and its walls destroyed. Meanwhile, Salaces has escaped following his route and informed the Parthian ruler Orodes II of Crassus's actions. Orodes dispatches an embassy to Crassus, who is now back in his winter quarters after garrisoning the far side of the Euphrates with 2 cohorts of infantry as well as cavalry. The diplomats demand to know why Crassus has so flagrantly attacked without cause, asking him pointedly if it was true that he did not have Senate approval for his operations. If it were simply a mistake of his old age, they tell him, then the breach of faith will be forgiven and no more said about it. Enraged at the insult, Crassus bellows at the emissaries that he will answer the Parthian king in his capital, Seleucia. Raising a gnarled hand upward, an elderly Persian named Vagizes tells Crassus that hair will grow on his palm before Crassus sees Seleucia. In other words, never. Crassus ignores the warning and spends the next months ransacking his territory of riches, including the Jewish temple at Jerusalem, which has already been plundered by Pompey years before. Crassus's son Publius arrives from Gaul at this time and is much admired for his valor, charm, and military capability. Also notable among Crassus's staff and commanders is Cassius Longinus, aged in his early 30s and ambitious to live up to his family's 5-century-long legacy. Other veteran officers are the tribune Petronius and legates Vargontinus and Octavius, who is known for his courageous and honorable character. Cassius frets that Crassus has spent the quiet months too focused on his accounts and neglecting the training and discipline of the legions. Other officers express similar reservations. They lament that Crassus has not built a fixed outpost in enemy territory, instead loosely garrisoning the towns and villages and their restive populations with small detachments of legionaries and cavalry. Crassus has also failed to establish a suitable port arrangement for supply and provisioning of the campaign, a failure that must have Pompey's former officers baffled and apprehensive for the campaign on the horizon. Crassus has hired a writer by the name of Apollonius with a view to chronicling and reporting his heroic deeds for the waiting public back in Italy, as Caesar has done with his Gallic War. However, before the commencement of his second march, Crassus receives 2 foreign visitors. The embassy from the Armenian king Artavasdes II comes with a strong force of riders and the offer of this force to Crassus for his use. Artavasdes counsels Crassus to use the mountainous territory of Armenia as his route into the Parthian Empire, and pledges to provide him with tens of thousands of additional infantry and cavalry. While the Roman presence there would keep the king's land safe from Parthian attack, it would also hinder the enemy cavalry from interfering with Crassus's march. But Crassus refuses the offer because he does not trust the Armenians and wants to keep his legions on their better-suited flat ground. The second group is headed by a tribal leader of the Osroene territory named Agbar. Agbar served Pompey in his eastern campaign, and it is possible that Crassus's political ally had even recommended him. Agbar assures Crassus that Orodes' Parthian army and administration is in disarray, and this disorder will make the campaign a walkover. Crassus decides to use Agbar as his guide, and again ignoring the prudent wariness of Cassius and Publius, has his army cross the Euphrates and march due east. That the Parthian Empire is in confusion is not an unlikely situation in Crassus's mind. Apart from the state of frequent civil war, it has been subject to incursions from foreign powers for more than 30 years, and if tribal confederations from the edge of China to the fringes of Arabia can wrest territory from the distracted Parthians, then the Roman Republic, with the finest army in the world, is capable of crushing it entirely and extending the imperium to the very limits of the earth. Or so Crassus reasons. In fact, Orodes is a proficient and utterly brutal ruler who has used the months that Crassus idled on the western edge of the Euphrates to build up an army capable of meeting Crassus's force. Crassus has received sinister reports of horsemen riding and whipping up dust on the outskirts of his garrisoned towns, and there are also stories that sentries are being struck with arrows of alarming power. Characteristically, he pays them little heed. Orodes embarks on a simple strategy. Knowing from his own mouth that Crassus's goal is to reach Seleucia on the Tigris, a distance of hundreds of miles, Orodes dispatches his lieutenant Serena with a cavalry force of 10,000 men to Mesopotamia to harry and slow the legion's march if they take the southern route along the Euphrates and make their crossing there. The Persian cavalry that Serena commands utilizes horses bred on the Nicaean plain in Iran, south of the Zagros Mountains. These are a particularly attractive yet hardy and fast breed, speedier than the Romans' usual Iberian mounts. More generally, Serena's Parthian army is a strange hybrid of both the ancient and the modern by Roman standards. Composed largely of light horse archers, an implacable iron heart lies at the center of this seemingly porous and loose body of men. Serena's 1,000 Parthian cataphracts are armored to an extent unseen by the Roman world prior to Crassus's lifetime. To fully grasp the strength and sophistication of the Parthian army, its social hierarchy, manpower reserves, and unique unit composition and organization, we would have to make a separate video. But that's precisely why we collaborated with Historia Militum, whose latest video covers just that. You can watch their complete analysis of the Parthian war machine through the link in the description. The Parthian light-mounted archers and their heavy cataphract fellows have developed to become mutually reinforcing. The demolishing impact of the cataphract, coupled with the number of arrows that the Parthian horse archer can unleash, is daunting and demoralizing to the victim. 3 arrows from the saddle in just 6 seconds is possible, a phenomenal feat. While Serena moves with this force to intercept Crassus, Orodes takes the greater part of his army, at least twice as many mounted and foot as Serena, into Armenia to eliminate Rome's ally and a potent regional power, with the intention to meet Crassus in battle should he take this most likely northern route down the Euphrates. Quite incredibly, Crassus has taken neither of the safe routes to the north or the south, where the waters of the Euphrates will keep his army replenished and in fighting order. Instead, he has crossed the Euphrates on a pontoon bridge at Zeugma and headed due east, away from the water. Matters are not helped when the auspices prior to the army's departure are unfavorable, and Crassus compounds the dire omens by dropping the organs when they are handed to him. Almost immediately, the men have issues with heat and thirst, and this increases the farther they move from the relatively fertile, near coastal regions. It seems that Crassus has made no provisions for supply. Veterans of Pompey's campaigns amongst his legions chafe and fret at the shortages. Prior to Pompey's supposed easy victory at Abas, he ensured his army's drinking water in the wilds of the far north by sequestering and filling 10,000 water skins. When the rank and file see that Crassus has not attended to this, morale begins to sink, and Crassus's promises of effortless victories and countless riches ring like hollow barrels. The ground they march on is a rough, flat plain where crops of limestone spring up between dirt, shingle, and rocks. Patches of thin grass of varying sizes are everywhere, but the season has rendered them all a scorched brown. With only that and the occasional shrub, there is no source of fodder for horses, and a similar lack of water. The smell of the strange-looking plants and grasses give the air a spiced, scented fragrance, lingering in the dry nostrils of the burdened, trudging legionaries. Akbar the Osroene is acting as the legion's guide, and he mocks their discomfort, telling them that they are a long way from Campania. With Parthian spies and scouts watching the unmistakably large Roman host, Serena is quickly informed of Crassus's movements, and he brings his army up to make an interception. In the meantime, the Romans continue through this harshest terrain, likely realizing that Crassus has made a catastrophic misjudgment when Akbar disappears from the camp in the night, and their other scouts begin not to return. The suffering legionaries, who are marching in full armor as well as carrying their kit, are exhilarated when they reach the Balissos River, which, though small, provides them with badly needed sustenance. Crassus goes against his officer's opinion that the army should construct a camp at the river, a fortified compound that would provide a somewhat defensible position and also a ready supply of water. A night's rest would restore the army's strength, as well as give the leadership time to assess the size and disposition of any nearby enemy force. But Crassus has received reports that the enemy is close enough to be engaged this very day, and Publius is excited by the discovery of cavalry tracks, their number indicating perhaps even an entire division. Publius, the heroic cavalryman of the Gallic Wars, insists that they march, and Crassus, the old reflexes of his martial youth twitching once more, gives the order for an advance. The land beyond the Balassus is a vast, empty plain, where the horsemen the Romans are trailing can appear from any direction. Some scouts arrive back to the main body of the army with the news that they have been engaged by a confident force of mounted Parthians, and only narrowly escaped after taking heavy casualties. Declining Cassius's and the other commanders' suggestion that the legions display in a line of advance with cavalry on the wings, Crassus has the army form a square as it moves forward, so that it can deter mounted attacks from the rear and flanks. The two armies come into sight of one another at a plain on the eastern side of the town of Carrhae. The Romans have not had time at the river to fully replenish themselves and eat, and Crassus has also marched them into the barren plain with a quick march, leaving no allowance for the usual rest stops or a moderate pace to scout for intelligence on the enemy. The town of Carrhae itself submitted to Crassus the year before, but it is some hours' march away from their position. With 150 kilometers between Zeugma and Carrhae, the legionaries have now been marching for about 5 days, refreshed somewhat at the Balissos, but they are nevertheless mentally strong enough to fight. Under the broiling midday sun, they review the enemy and see that it is indeed a single cavalry division, light mounted archers, and no match for a Roman army of up to 36,000 men. Before their generals give any order, however, a noise begins at the rear of the Parthian line, a clattering, tremulous din that grows until it rings like a million cicadas with timbrels resonating underneath a violent electrical storm. The light archers in the Parthian front separate, and the drumlin-like hillocks behind them start to move. The far greater part of the Parthian army reveals itself, a force of 9,000 horse archers with 1,000 heavy cataphracts throwing off dull brown cloaks under which they have been concealing their presence. The legionaries watch as their armor glitters in the sun, the ringing of drums and their attached bells continuing as the cataphracts start their advance. The legion's musicians begin their own retort, the cornum horns bellowing the order to lock shields. The mounted archers race ahead of the cataphracts and began loosing arrows into the Roman square, a number of them striking home or hitting shields. The trooper that falls instantly replaced by the man behind, the shield wall standing as an impenetrable barrier. The archers wheel off and the cataphracts come through the center, hurtling toward the Roman line with their lances aimed for maximum impact. The legionaries in the front rank plant their right feet and draw up their peeler javelins. The second and third line behind them push forward with their own shields, pressing into their backs and reinforcing the massed square. The cataphracts throw up waves of dust as they ride, reaching their full speed just before their momentum propels them into the shield wall. The cataphracts feel their lances make contact with the shields, while the armored beasts beneath them shriek as they carry through to the line. The impact of the charge on the packed square is colossal. Each of the cataphracts' horses crush through the front rank, knocking the shield holders backward and smashing them against the lines behind and under the steel hooves. But the shield wall holds firm. The rear ranks press forward to reinforce their comrades in front. The dead are left to Elysium. The charge stalls in place. The slower mounts come up behind those now stuck in the snare of the Roman line, and a press ensues, lances having to be raised to avoid striking comrades. The Roman lines remain quiet, as though absorbing the insult just brought upon them. And then, when the Parthian noblemen are screaming and catcalling one another to cut forward or move aside, a tremulous, guttural roar comes from the red-cloaked legionaries behind the shields. Arise, Mars, god of war! Like a slumbering lion awoken by the bite of a hyena, the Roman legions come alive and go to their work. Still behind the cover of their shields, the front ranks stab with their gladii swords, slicing the unprotected tendons of the cataphract horses and punching up into their similarly exposed stomachs. The cataphracts tumble, their riders crushed under the tremendous weight of their beasts, and then stabbed through by the Romans on the ground. Lances are grabbed and pulled forward, launching the riders into the midst of the legion, where they are slaughtered. The finest infantry on earth puts the cataphracts to flight. The square reforms, and the casualties are brought into its hollow center. The cataphracts also withdraw, and Serena's thousands of mounted horse archers begin to move forward once more. The Rhoptron drums provide the rhythmic soundboard as the light horses, their riders using no saddle, jog into range and loose their arrows at will, the bolts appearing out of the dust cloud and burying themselves in shields or unprotected necks. The range of the archers renders the majority of the Roman missiles ineffective, though there are slingers among Crassus's forces who shoot back in the hope of hitting one of the twirling riders in the dust. Crassus orders the Roman cavalry to make a counter-charge, and they ride out from the square directly at the Parthians. The horse archers loose on them in their thousands as the Gallic cavalry rides forward, and then at the last moment, the Parthians turn their ponies about and shoot backward in the saddle, a maneuver that is new to the Romans. Loosing arrows over their shoulder, the horse archers inflict many more casualties on the auxiliaries until they reach the safety of the cataphracts, and the Roman cavalry is forced to withdraw to the square. Once there, the injuries and damage inflicted by the Parthians is clear to all. Emboldened by the failure of the counterattack, the horse archers come forward again, firing at the vulnerable points of the legionaries' bodies that the shields do not reach. Many legionaries are disabled by the shot of a composite bow arrow to the leg or foot. The Roman square becomes surrounded by thousands of archers, unrelentingly shooting arrows that shower out of the sky like sheets of razor-sharp hail. Crassus tells his hard-pressed commanders that they will assault in force once the Parthians have run out of arrows, but in the meantime, more cavalry sorties from the square end as ruinously as the first. The Parthian archers falling back and reverse shooting in the saddle, reaching the line of cataphracts, then shooting again at the Roman forces until they are forced to fall back to the square. Crassus's assertion that Syrena's force will soon run out of ammunition is proven to be a forlorn hope when one of his cavalrymen spots the last of the Parthian commander's surprises. The particular smell that has been irritating the legionaries is emanating from a tremendously long line of camels, 1,000 in number, positioned in the rear line of Syrena's force, behind the cataphracts. Every one of the desert animals is laden with panniers, and each one is filled to the brim with arrows. Crassus realizes that Syrena will not run out of ammunition, and his horse archers have free rein to loose on his men without hindrance. It is a jolting and dismaying development. Crassus decides that a breakout in force must be attempted, and he sends an order to his son Publius to lead it. Publius immediately sets out, leading the remainder of the army's cavalry with infantry support from 4,000 legionaries. Publius has led sorties in challenging circumstances in Gaul, and he and his men are capable veterans. Nevertheless, Gallic forces have not been trained since boyhood to shoot from the saddle in constant movement. Again, the Parthian riders in front of the counterattack fall back, shooting behind as they move toward the cataphract line. Meanwhile, the remaining horse archer forces on the other sides of the legionary square continue their arrow storm, pouring cloud after cloud of missiles onto the long-suffering men inside. Nevertheless, Publius's attack affords some respite, and Crassus has the square march under fire towards some higher ground that will afford him a better view of the theatre of conflict. The legionaries complete this maneuver under ruinous volleys from the archers, who maintain a constant and agonizing barrage. Shields cannot protect everything, even in a testudo, and the men who are disabled and left behind are quickly finished by the horsemen. The archers chased by Publius reach the cataphract line and move behind it, their quivers immediately replenished with arrows for the fighting to come. With these archers launching arrows over their heads, the cataphracts charge on Publius's cavalry, 1,000 men on each side. A grueling battle ensues, the cataphracts enjoying the weight of their charge and armor, but the Gauls and their Roman officers dismount and again slash at the underbellies and legs of their enemies' animals, grabbing the enemy's spears and yanking them from the saddle. It is a brave effort, but in a straight fight of equal numbers and with the advantage of the archers' support, the cataphracts gain the advantage. Publius's right hand is run through with an arrow, making him unable to wield his Sparta cavalry sword, but he and his men fight on, making it back to their infantry support line. The horse archers swirl around them, and now Publius too is surrounded and cut off from further movement. Thus, the battle is taking place at 2 points, the circumstances identical in both. Crassus is still likely leading a massive force of 20 to 30,000 men in his square, but they are under relentless assault, and Publius, after managing to find another rise of slightly higher ground, has his remaining cavalrymen and legionaries form a second, smaller square and hunker down underneath the barrage of arrows. Crassus is unable to see Publius's position and sends riders to ascertain the situation. When these disappear, he sends more scouts, and they report Publius's vulnerability. Finally accepting the inevitable, Crassus at last breaks the square and forms his army into a line of advance. It is an entirely infantry force, Crassus likely leading a token few hundred horsemen behind the front line cohorts. Unaware that his father is coming, Publius's redoubt is in danger of overwhelmment. Unwilling to take the risk that they will be captured alive, he and his brother officers, Censorinus and Megabacchus, decide to die on their own terms in the Roman manner. Moments later, the cataphracts trample the defences of the hillock and capture Publius's body. The dead from Publius's force number in the thousands, while hundreds are taken prisoner. Crassus and the main army arrive in the vicinity of Publius's position shortly after, but there is nothing but an eerie silence and a horribly large mass of their lifeless comrades. As Crassus surveys the scene, horse archers still shooting at him from a distance, the eerie Parthian drums begin once more, and he beholds the sight of his nightmares. The Parthians have decapitated his son and mounted his head on the end of a spear. To the tribal, animalistic beating of the rhoptron, one of the horse archers who has been tormenting Crassus and his army rides close enough to the Roman line that the father can see the features of the grey face, dead eyes pointed upwards, and the cheeks splashed with blood and dirt. Just as his father's head was mounted on a spear in the time of Marius and Sulla, so Crassus is forced to look once more on the dead face of the one he loved most in the world. With their commander temporarily incapacitated by grief, the Romans again form a square, and the attacks resume for the late afternoon and the evening. The barrage finally ceases with the dark, and with the halting of the drums, the men are left with the sound of their ragged breathing and the sinister thoughts in their heads. Serena has a herald approach the line with a message. Crassus has the night to mourn his son, but by dawn either he will surrender and be presented to Orodes, the King of Kings, or else he will join Publius in the afterlife. Crassus ignores the message and resolutely tells his men that they are not to grieve for the loss of Publius or their companions. Instead, they should turn their sadness to anger and resist the enemy with all of their valor and prowess. After ascertaining that Serena and his force has departed the area, Crassus gives the order to withdraw to Carrhae town. There is no time to make preparations for the thousands of wounded who lie amongst the dead, so the battered and bleeding legions withdraw from the killing ground to the noise of their screams and agonized realization of their fate. Crassus takes a winding route back to Carrhae, attempting to elude any attempt by Serena to locate and pursue him. The garrison and its commander, Coponius, first learn that Crassus and his army have suffered a reversal, but no more from remnants of Publius's Gallic horsemen who have reached the walls ahead of the army. The Gauls refuse to identify themselves and instead ride through the town and in the direction of the Euphrates. The men's manner and hurried exit compel Coponius to leave with a party of legionaries and scouts, and they locate Crassus's main force and guide them back to the gates. 4 cohorts, or about 2,000 men, led by Legate Vargontinus, are lost in the night and never heard from again. Serena and his cavalry army are not long in arriving and surrounding the town. Crassus still holds a numerical advantage over his enemy, but the toll of the previous day's mauling has been compounded by a forced night march, and his men are in no condition to fight. Similarly, Serina's mobile force is not outfitted to storm the town, so the day passes in a standoff. Crassus's lack of supplies once more afflicts him, as Carrhae cannot keep a force of his size for more than a day, so he elects to retreat once more in the night and make for the Euphrates. The army splits into different columns, which will help to confuse Serina and hide Crassus's location. Capturing the Roman commander is now the Parthians' greatest prize. Cassius, every one of his councils since the year previous having been ignored, takes the very last of the mounted personnel, probably somewhere in the region of 500 men, and gallops for the river and safety. Crassus himself marches with a company of 4 cohorts, while a larger 5,000-man host marches separately under Legate Octavius. By dawn the next day, the various columns are out of the scrub desert and back in the more fertile riverlands of the Euphrates. Octavius reaches a safe point around Synaca, where he can pitch a defensive position, but Crassus and his party are again misserved by a guide who leads them into a marsh area. The Parthians, who have been harrying the columns through the day, locate Crassus's position and surround him. His forces are compelled to hide behind their shield walls, though the marsh area is at least as much an impediment to the mounted troops as it is to those on foot. Octavius observes the fight from his redoubt and heroically launches a rescue attempt, his men fighting through the Parthian line, linking up with Crassus's cohorts and bringing them back to the safety of the hill. Night closes in once more, and the attacks cease. Crassus seems to have escaped with his life. With the Euphrates likely within a few hours' march, and Serina unwilling to send his search parties out at night, he just needs a short period to pass so that the dark settles in, and he can make a final, rushed dash for Roman territory. Serina can see the chance of crystallizing his victory slipping away, and so he makes a final bid to capture the man who had thought to invade the Parthian realm. Under a flag of truce, Serina approaches the Roman defensive line with his bow unslung and calls out for Crassus to enter negotiations for safe passage back to the Euphrates. He also releases some Roman captives whom he has made sure have heard talk in the Parthian camp that Serina and Orodes only want peace and will not harm Crassus or his men. Crassus demurs at the offer, but his men, exhausted, terrified, and humiliated by the ordeal of the previous days, first appeal to him to speak with Serina, and then become angry, banging their weapons against shields and putting Crassus in fear of his life. He finally agrees to do what they ask, telling his remaining officers, "Tell the world, if you get safely home, that Crassus perished because he was deceived by his enemies, and not because he was delivered up to them by his countrymen." Then Crassus, the consul of Rome who has watched the legacy of his life's work torn out of existence when he witnessed his son's head on a spear, walks down the hill to meet his nemesis, accompanied by the loyal Octavius and Petronius, as well as 2 brother officers from the family Rossi. After unsuccessfully attempting to capture Crassus, Serina's men kill him and his party, Octavius and Petronius protecting him to the end. If the legionaries on the hill who have forced their leader to deliver himself into the hands of their enemies believe Fortuna will smile on them and they will once more see the paradise of Italy, they are terribly mistaken. Serina takes fully 10,000 men prisoner, 5,000 from the hill, and the same number again from stragglers and panicked between there and the battlefield, And these are sent to the remotest wastes of Central Asia, the few that survive the death march, eking out their days fighting for the very men who have deprived them of their liberty. The dead and dying left on the battlefield near Carrhae are slaughtered by Serina's gangs of battlefield scavengers, while few others reach the sanctuary of the western bank of the river. Packs of horsemen roam the countryside for days in the aftermath. Serina sends Crassus's head to Euphrates, where he is enjoying the hospitality of the Armenian king. Serina believes that Euphrates will reward him for his fantastic victory, obliterating a Roman army 4 times the size of his own force, but he too is sadly mistaken. Just months after the battle, with the Roman border quiet, Serina is put to death lest he pose a threat to the Shah and Shah's rule. Parthia has proved itself a power capable of matching Rome in a way that no other adversary has since Carthage, but the Republic possesses unprecedented reserves of manpower, and Crassus has many friends, Gaius Julius Caesar foremost among them, and already plans are being drawn up for a war of revenge in his name. Carrhae will prove to be the spectacular and deadly start to a rivalry that will span the centuries, as the 2 superpowers of the ancient world lock horns and battle for the heart of the Near East and all its glory. Don't forget to use my Raid Shadow Legends link in the description or scan my QR code to get insane bonuses for new players with 3 legendary champions and 1 epic champion. If you like what you see, consider supporting my work on Patreon, and you get ad-free early access to my videos for as little as $1. You can also show your support by liking the video, commenting, and subscribing to my channel as a sacrifice to the algorithm. As always, I'll see you in the next one.